Today I'm going to show you how you can build a fully functional plumbing system in your van, schoolie, or tiny home. I'm going to cover one of the biggest mistakes people make in their plumbing build. This is a mistake which can have some lifelong health consequences and even kill you if overlooked. Let me know down in the comments what you think it's going to be. No skipping ahead and cheating. I'm also going to cover a whole bunch of mistakes I've seen people make in their plumbing videos, so be sure to watch to the end so you don't miss any of those. So aside from my electrical build, this was probably the most intimidating part of the process for me, but it doesn't have to be, so I'm going to make things as simple as possible. First things first, you're going to need some essential components for your plumbing system. I myself have a fresh water tank, a gray water tank, a mechanical pump with a mesh filter already attached. I have a separate water filter. I have a kitchen faucet. I have water testing strips. I have a couple different sized connectors. I have Teflon tape and some tubing. Don't let that list overwhelm you. We're gonna cover it piece by piece. Starting with the fresh water tank. You guessed it, this will hold your fresh water. You wanna place this somewhere relatively accessible so when it comes time to fill, you don't need to rearrange your entire van. I opted for a 28-gallon water tank that's designed to fit right over my wheel well. It saves me space, but it did cost a couple bucks up front. The cost was about $300, but it holds 28 gallons, so I can adventure for long periods of time without having any worry about my water. This container is all BPA-free, food-grade plastic, and it's tested and verified by Testing Engineers International to ensure its quality. My health is really important to me, so I take this sort of thing seriously. The tank comes with a few holes already drilled and plugged, so those plugs are really easy to remove if you want. I needed one more hole on top for a vent, so I drilled it out with a hole saw and vacuumed up all the plastic bits. You need to install a vent in the tank so the system doesn't become a vacuum. As the water comes out, that empty space needs to be replaced with air. If there's nowhere for air to come in, your water's not gonna come out. Once I had that vent hole drilled out, all I needed to do was install a barb and attach some of my extra tubing to the top of it. So after drilling out that vent hole, I vacuumed out everything I could, and then I needed to rinse it to get any remaining bits out. After rinsing it with a little bit of water, I decided to just clean the tank overall and do a vinegar wash. To do this, all you need to do is add 4 ounces of vinegar to your tank, fill the rest of the tank full with water, and let it sit for about 12 hours. This will ensure a properly cleaned tank. Once the water tank was all prepped and cleaned, I put it in my van and secured it with some P-tape. With the tank officially installed, I was ready to add some fittings. This is where we're gonna talk about the dangerous stuff, lead.
I'm a lead farmer, mother.
If you guessed lead, good job. I think most people know lead isn't good for your health, but if you do ingest too much lead, it can cause seizures, anemia, neurological problems, kidney failure, and even death. A lot of plumbing connectors are made for non-potable water, so that's water that's essentially not going to be drinking friendly. If you use those connectors, they typically have lead, and you're going to be ingesting a lot of lead into your system. Will you get sick from using fittings that have lead in them? Maybe, I don't know. Do I personally want to avoid any lead going into my body that I can? Yes. In preparation for doing my plumbing build, I watched a lot of different people's plumbing designs, and I don't think I saw once where anybody mentioned anything about lead or potable safe fittings. To minimize or negate this risk, make sure any brass you use is lead free, or you can do what I did and just use stainless steel fittings. They cost a little bit more, but this is our health we're talking about. In addition to the metal fittings, also make sure any tubing you use is lead free and potable safe. All right, that's gonna be the end of my lead rant. Moving on. So all I had to do to install my barb connector was just wrap it in a little bit of Teflon tape and twist the thing in there. Make sure you wrap your Teflon tape against the direction you'll be twisting so it doesn't just unwrap. Another important thing to note, if you are using a plastic water tank like I imagine most people are, be careful not to over tighten your threads. The metal fittings will rip those threads if you over torque them. Make sure they're snug, but not overly so. So when you're gathering supplies, you're probably going to see the terms ID and OD on a lot of things. All this stands for is either inside or internal diameter and outside diameter. When you have a piece of tube, you have the distance from the inside wall to the other side of the inside wall. That is the inside diameter. You also have the distance from the outside wall to the other outside wall. That is the outside diameter. This is important because if you have a fitting with a 1/2 inch barb, for instance, you want to make sure you don't get a tube that has a 1/2 inch outside diameter, or you're going to have a real difficult time getting that thing onto the barb. You want to make sure that the tube you grab has a 1/2 inch internal diameter. It'll slide over that barb and you'll be able to cinch it down with a hose clamp. So once I had that first barb installed on my tank, I was ready to install my water pump. This was as easy as drilling 4 screws to hold the thing in place and then running some wires to my fuse box. I did install a switch along the way, but it wasn't really necessary because the water pump shuts on and off with the opening and closing of the faucet anyway, so it doesn't really drain any power by just being on all the time. As far as wiring the water pump, I've covered wiring a bunch of different things in my van build series, so maybe go back and check out my electrical build and I kind of go over how and why we wire things the way we do. Because of that minimal power consumption, I really recommend the electrical water pump over the foot pump, but you do you. So I installed my water pump in a fashion that looks like it's upside down, but this was all part of my careful design here. You want the flow of water underneath the motor on your pump. If there is an internal leak somewhere in the pump and the flow of water is above, it's going to leak down into the motor and your water pump will be ruined. If your pump developed a leak somehow and the flow of water is underneath it, it's much less likely that any of that water is going to get into the actual motor. So with that water pump in place, I could now connect my first hose. There's more than likely arrows on your water pump pointing the direction of the flow of water. Make sure you connect in the right order and don't try to run water backwards through your pump because it's not going to work. So when you're connecting this first tube to your pump and to your tank, make sure that it matches the PSI of your water pump. For instance, my water pump maxes out at 50 PSI. So I needed tubing capable of handling more than 50 PSI. I got some food safe braided vinyl tubing from Home Depot that can handle upwards of 80 PSI. So I'm all good to go here. If you try to use non-reinforced or non-pressure safe tubing, your tube is going to explode under the pressure that that electric pump generates and you're going to have a wet van. Not a very good time. So attach that hose, cinch it down with a hose clamp, and let's move on. Now we're going to connect another hose to the other end of that water pump, and in my case, I'm running it to another water filter. There was a mesh filter already built onto the inlet side of my water pump, so I didn't need to install that, and that's just to catch any debris in case debris found its way into your water tank, and make sure that no little like pebbles or anything weird gets into your water pump and destroys it. This filter that I'm installing is to filter out any other kind of weird stuff in the water and also just make it taste a lot better. So we're just gonna run another tube from the other side of that water pump, cinch it down with a hose clamp, and then we're gonna connect it to one side of the water filter. Now I just need to connect the other end of that filter to my faucet lines. For this step, I grabbed myself a 3-way diverter valve. One end of this connected to my open water filter line and the other 2 ends connected to both my hot and cold faucet lines. I don't have hot water in my van unless I boil it. But if I just left that hot water line dangling there and didn't attach it to anything, if I ever changed my faucet to the hot setting, nothing would come out. So I just wanted water to come out regardless of the position that my faucet handle was in. So I just attached both of these lines to that same diverter. Now that we have the faucet hooked up, we need a way to fill our water tank. So on the other side of my tank, I installed a shutoff valve so I could open it when I need to fill it and close it once it's full. I also bought a garden hose to fill this thing, potable, water safe of course, and added a quick release to the end of it and the end of the valve on my water tank so I can connect and release it with ease. Back to the sink. Underneath my sink, I attached a flexible RV drain tube to a gray water tank. I'll link this tube below if you want to use the same for your sink, and it feeds into my 5-gallon gray water tank. Make sure you also vent your gray water tank, otherwise that water is not going to go in unless the air has a place to go. I did this by just drilling an extra little hole in the top of my tank. As an optional step, I also drilled a hole through the floor of my van and installed a valve in my gray water tank. If I'm somewhere dump friendly, I can just dump the gray water through the bottom of my van, and if not, then I can detach the tank and take it somewhere that is dump friendly. All right, we're almost ready to test the system. Before we put any water into the system, I recommend testing it with some water testing strips. I got a pack of about 150 of these on Amazon. I'll link it down below as well. These just help you make sure your water source isn't contaminated. Maybe I'm paranoid, but I like clean water. All you need to do is fill a cup of water from the source you want to use. You're going to take one of the testing strips, submerge it in the water for 2 seconds, pull it out and let it dry for 60 seconds. After that 60 seconds, compare your strip to the key on the bottle and it will tell you based on color how much of which substance you have in that water and if it's safe for drinking. Obviously, if you have some harmful contaminants, probably go find another water source. Assuming your water source is safe, we can now start filling the tank a little bit and do our first test run. I recommend not filling your tank full right from the get-go. Fill it just a little bit and make sure you don't have any leaks. If you do have a leak, it's better that you have a small amount of water in the tank than a lot. Run your faucet all the way through into your gray water tank. Make sure everything's watertight and running smoothly. Hopefully you don't find any leaks and your system is good to go, so get out there and go explore. If you do find any leaks, you may be able to just fix it with some Teflon tape and maybe a little bit of extra tightening. And that's gonna conclude things today, guys. I hope everyone learned something. I hope you don't get lead poisoning, and I hope you have all the water in the world to drink. Be sure to like and subscribe, share this video with somebody you know who drinks water, and I will smell you later. Bye-bye. So on the other side of my tank, I installed a shut-off valve. For this step, I grabbed myself a 3-watt